Hello everyone, my name is Abby and a big welcome to everybody joining us for Creative Careers Week. The team at 2020 Productions is super pleased to bring you 5 very special interviews with several professionals across the creative industry. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Richard White, who is the lead for marketing and communications for the University of Cambridge Museums. Richard, it's so great to be joined by you today, and it would be great if you could just tell me a little bit about yourself and your line of work, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely fine. So you've helped me out by telling everyone what my job role is. So, blimey, about myself, or maybe we'll get into that a bit later, but I am very fortunate in that I get to work at the University of Cambridge Museums, which is 8 museums and a botanic garden. So lots of really interesting places. And my role essentially is to promote those places to as wide an audience as possible, and to sort of make those spaces feel like places where everyone is welcome, because they are. Um, and I work with the University of Cambridge Museums team, who ultimately help with that sort of work to welcome audiences in. So we do all sorts of interesting programs that open up those collections, and then I get the sort of pleasure of trying to get the word out about them. And that's not just what I do. I do lots of sort of work in audience research. I get to do sort of live films in the museums, that kind of stuff. But it's very varied, and really good fun.
Yeah, that's amazing. It sounds fantastic. And I think your role is particularly interesting because I think people seem to forget that these roles do exist in terms of museum and exhibition, the exhibition sector. So it's a great opportunity for everyone watching to learn about the role that they don't really know much about. And I know that your interest for art and media began while you were studying, which actually led you to achieving a fine art degree. And I think that's a pretty niche topic. And I was just wondering if you could tell me what kind of happened in the middle, when you went from studying that at university to then going on to work for the University of Cambridge Museums.
So what happened in between? Lots of different things happened, really. So I've always loved the arts. That's my main passion, particularly the sort of practical aspect of drawing and painting, that kind of thing. And so when I left university, I carried on painting, really. I carried on painting with this sort of vision of becoming an extraordinary, famous artist. And then realized actually that might be quite hard to achieve, at least immediately anyway. And realized also that I need to start thinking about like money and, and ways of, living my own life away from my parents. Not that it wasn't lovely just staying with them all the time. And so I started looking for different opportunities, and it's very difficult, I think, when you leave university. I don't think it matters what kind of degree you got. You're not going to sort of, well, unless you're extremely lucky, you're not just going to land your dream job straight away. And to be perfectly honest, I wasn't really sure what my dream job was, beyond being an independent artist. And so I did lots of different temping roles, and ended up working in places like Stansted Airport, which was really bizarre because in temping roles you don't really expect too much responsibility, but I was there essentially buying and selling plane parts, which was really sort of really strange, high pressure job, because sometimes it meant if I didn't get a particular part in time, then people wouldn't be flying off on a holiday on a particular day or
Oh
something
my
like
God.
that. So that was really bizarre, really strange. But I learned a lot from that role because it was quite high pressured. It was an office job, which I'd never really had before. So I did stuff like that. I ended up working in Crufts for a little bit at the Birmingham NEC, and that was more like a sort of selling job. I was like selling like weird sort of dog products, like doormats and cards. And again, that taught me loads because it was about sort of interacting with the public and, the skills that you need to sort of sell things and engage with people. and other things like the post office and all sorts. And while I was doing that work, I guess I was sort of gaining experience, and I was adding those things to my CV. Despite how bizarre they sound, you can make them sound pretty good on a CV, I think. And I just happened to see an opportunity at Arts Council England, who are a funder for the arts in the UK, and they had a role for a communications administrator, which again wasn't necessarily a role I sort of thought I'd see myself in, but you know, it's the Arts Council, and that really appealed to me because I thought, well, I'll have a really good overview of what the arts offer is in this country, and so I went for it, and somehow I got the role, you know, and I often question that actually, because my fear is there are people that probably had, I don't know, studied sort of communications or marketing, you know, at college or university, and hadn't got that role. But anyway, I was very fortunate I got it. It got me into, again, an office environment where I was surrounded by people who were, you know, meeting with arts organisations, and my role suddenly became about communicating the work Arts Council were doing with those arts organisations. And then after a while, I realised, probably about sort of 4 years of gaining good experience there, I realised I wanted to get within the arts organisations. And because I was now on this sort of path of communications, it meant that was the road I sort of went down, because those roles sort of came up. So I ended up managing to get a marketing and communications assistant role at a place called Writers' Centre Norwich, which is now known as the National Centre for Writing. And it's an amazing literature organisation in Norwich. And I had to travel really far to go there. It's like an hour journey there, hour journey back on a train, but it was worth it. And I worked there for 6 years, and that was cool because I got to, you know, the organisation did sort of literature festivals and workshops of writers, and I met some incredible authors through doing that work, and obviously gained lots of skills in kind of very sort of traditional sense of marketing, you know, creating sort of leaflets, writing e-newsletters, writing press releases, doing a lot of website work. And this is back when websites, you know, internet was very much established, but I was getting opportunities like actually building websites, which I think it was at a time where you could do that, you know, and maybe, I mean, obviously you can now, but I was literally building sites for the organization, which is quite rare. And so, yeah, so I got to do that for quite a while. And again, there just sort of came a point, I think you always know when you're working in an organization, a point comes along where you feel like you need to move on to sort of try something new. And that's when the museums, the University of Cambridge Museums role came up. And yeah, it was in Cambridge, it sort of suited me better, but also I just loved the idea of those collections, the history behind them, the incredible things I would see there and get involved in was really appealing. So that, oh, very long-winded, but that is how I ended up at the museums.
No, that's it's fascinating the way, even though that, you know, working at Stansted and doing stuff at Crufts, those were skills that you learn, which now you can incorporate into your job on the
Yeah,
daily, I expect. So, you know,
totally. Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, I look back on those roles really fondly, because they're really sort of unique memories compared to, I don't know, like when you get into professional life, it all becomes a bit professional. Whereas back then it was all sort of
sure.
very exciting, very unusual. Birmingham NEC, massive place, you know, I'd never been to before. It's all sort of fun adventures in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just funny the way, you know, you came from doing a fine art degree, did all this like random jobs, and now, you know, you're in a job that you really enjoy and love. So since starting working for Cambridge University Museums, are there any standout moments that have really stuck out for you?
In the museums, yeah. Oh, blimey, there's so many. I mean, I can think of probably like the first couple of weeks when I worked there. I was sort of being given lots of different tours, and a real standout moment, and I hadn't planned on talking about this at all, was when I went to the Museum of Zoology, and they just had, or they'd started work on some new stores for their collections. I mean, they've got millions and millions of, I was going to say objects, but they're animal, specimens
Yeah.
and things. Um, and so they've got these new state-of-the-art stores, and I was being sort of shown around, and I thought, oh wow, this all looks really shiny and impressive. And then the guy who showed me around, Matt, he sort of heads up the collections there. He sort of just pulled open a drawer, and there was a few of us, and he said, oh, and I wanted to show you these, and he placed like a finch, which was in a plastic bag on my hand, and that was one of the finches from Darwin that Darwin had collected, which they
No.
now store in the museum. And I mean, there's probably countless sort of moments like that where you're suddenly placed in front of a real incredible moment in history that is so significant to today. And there it was in my hands, and yeah, that seems to sort of, that's the real beauty of the role I have, and the role many of us have in museums, is that we get to see those things up close. And I suppose part of my role, I feel like, is trying to make that as possible, as much possible for the people that aren't working in the museums, that come to visit. And whether we do that in the museums themselves, or more digitally, that's like the fun part. So that's really stand out. I mean, some of the projects we work on are really good fun. We're a very small team, the central university team. So when we run some of our big projects, like Twilight at the Museums would be happening
Yeah.
about now, actually, and that's
I've been to one
massive.
before.
Brilliant. Yeah, and we absolutely love that program. We've been running it for years, and we continue to, because it's so popular in the city. And it's really good fun for us on the night, because a lot of our time is sort of spent in an office, but on nights like that, we're actually out on the streets, we're helping the museums to sort of make sure everything runs smoothly. And my particular role is like trying to capture as much on social media as possible. So I get to get on my bike and cycle around all the museums, sort of capturing all the different moments. Usually it's hammering down with rain, and it's freezing cold. So it's not all fun and games, but yeah, I mean, they're standouts, I think.
So, although now you have found a career which you absolutely adore doing, you love your job, I'm just wondering if there were any conflicts in the time you were, going on that road. There were lots of different jobs that you were doing in the meantime. Did you ever feel that it wasn't possible to perhaps work in the job you are now?
Probably loads of moments. I mean, more often that's led by self-doubt. I think, that's probably very common, isn't it, amongst all of us, that we don't quite believe in ourselves as much as we should. And I feel like, especially when you're younger, that is something really hard to get past. And I feel like now I'm where I am now. But I still suffer from self-doubt, but it's improved, and just through experience, that kind of thing. But probably the biggest sort of hitch I had was in my education, and it was back when I was doing A levels, and I decided to do like a media course. That's what I decided I wanted to do. I was sort of really interested in animation and filmmaking, sort of generally. And although I really enjoyed the course, and I had a lot of fun learning about that stuff, at the same time, I wasn't really applying myself as much as I should, and ended up working my way towards failing. And by the time anyone found out about it, I mean, I was so good at covering up, my failures in that course, that it was too late. By the time we got to the end of the course, my tutor, I remember, got in touch with my parents and said, he's failing. And they were really angry. They were like, why didn't you tell us before that? And I think it's because I'd even hid it from the tutor.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I ended up failing that media course. And I think at that point, not that you decide your future in any way at that stage, it felt at the time like, oh my word, what am I going to do? And And it was only really due to my interest in the arts and the fact I was still drawing and doing that side of things that it meant I could sidestep and get onto like an art foundation course and then pursue that. So I was very lucky, really, and probably, you know, possibly even a touch sort of privileged in a way that I was able just to do that through the support of my parents and, you know, that side of things. That was probably the biggest, when I think back, the biggest sort of conflict. I mean, otherwise, there's no sort of, you know, within the sort of a working environment through, you know, through the temping jobs and all the different roles I did, there were plenty of sort of scary moments where I think I was being asked to do something I was really nervous about and wasn't sure whether I'd be able to achieve that, you know, but they're all sort of normal feelings. You know, if you don't feel like that, then you're probably not going to do very well. You know, you've got to sometimes embrace the fear and then that way you'll put the effort in. I think back when I was studying, that's what I didn't do. You know, I didn't feel the fear, and as a result didn't meet deadlines or achieve really what I should have. So
Yeah, well, I think in a way fear of doing something you're not necessarily wanting to do for the rest of your life kind of does drive you towards, you know, future
yeah,
aspirations, which is great.
absolutely. Yeah.
And now you're in a job which you absolutely love. But if you could specifically tie it down to something, I think you basically covered it, but why is it that you love what you are doing in your role every day? Why do you love going to work?
Cool. I think it's because it's so varied. I think that's the best thing in a way. Like, so I was saying earlier, my role could involve, you know, working with the press. It could, you know, on certain projects. It could be designing stuff. Like I have an interest in graphic design, and I
Yeah.
sort of do that freelance. And that all came through my interest in the arts, but also all of my jobs leading up to this one recognized that I had some sort of, you know, I don't want to say skill, but I will, like, you know, some sort of
Skill.
skill in that area. And so took advantage of it. And as a result, I sort of developed with the graphic design side of things. So I could be doing, so I do some of that for the museums. It could be like posters and, you know, web banners, things, you know,
Yeah.
classic little things like that. I could be, you know, like I said, doing lives on Facebook or on Twitter, like, and that was one of those things I was really sort of fearful of because we very much were, we've got a phone, we're going to go behind the scenes and sort of open that up to people, and I'm going to present it, right, and sit in front of a camera, something I'd never really done before. And I wouldn't say they're perfect, but they're, you know, it's another sort of fun thing we get to do. So that variation is just really important because it means every day is slightly different. And the fact that there are 8 museums in the Botanic Garden that I work across. So again, that sort of variation of what each of those museums are doing means they might want support from me for all sorts of different types of work. And obviously all of their collections are quite different from each other.
Yeah.
So that adds to the variation. So I think there's a lot to be said for like specializing in one area. Like I said, you know, I was sort of, when I was younger, I wanted to maybe do animation. I think there's a really good thing about sort of honing in on something, but there's also a lot to be said for kind of working across lots of different areas because you get a taste of each of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's a privilege in a way of working in a creative career. You know, you're always going to have the opportunity to try out different things, which, like you just said, there's so many opportunities everywhere. Um,
Definitely.
that's brilliant, and you've answered all my questions wonderfully. But if you were going to just give any advice or words of wisdom to anyone that's curious about pursuing a career that's relevant to yours or within the arts and culture sector, do you have any final words to give them?
Oh, blimey.
No pressure.
Yeah, it's always it's got to be inspiring. Um, I would say, like for me, if I think back to me, then what I was saying earlier on about sort of really believing in yourself, and not letting the sort of fear get to you. Because when I was younger, like if an opportunity came up to do, I don't know, like work experience in a museum, or whether it was volunteering in a museum, I think I would have shied away from that.
Mm.
But I don't know why, I just think I would have. But my advice to myself would have been to really go for those things, and that they're not as scary as maybe you'd think. Like, you know, I always sort of wondered if that was me, I would have been slightly scared about what the museum person was like,
Mm.
or, you know, and that sort of interaction, when actually, you know, no one's as scary as what you'd think they'd be.
Yeah.
And when you're being invited into places to help, like to do work experience or volunteering, you know, you're being welcomed in, and it'll be a really amazing experience. So you know, it's sort of grabbing opportunities, I guess, isn't it? And whatever your interest is, it's just really exploring what's going to help you to get into that kind of role.
Absolutely.
um yeah, and then if not, then you might be lucky and you might just fall into it. Because I should have said right at the start, I never expected to work in museums. That was not an aspiration of mine, but
Mhm.
I'm really, really pleased it happened, you know. So sometimes these things sort of can just happen, and that's okay as well.
Yeah, definitely. But I do think you're right in regard to taking as many opportunities as possible, and they are out there. It's just recognizing and finding them.
I was just going to say, it is recognizing and finding them, and research is
Yeah.
really important. It's such I don't know why, for me it's one of those words I find slightly boring, but actually it's really good.
Mm.
Research is really good, and it will help you find what you are looking for.
Absolutely. Well, it's been absolutely wonderful chatting to you, Richard, and thank you so much for joining in with Creative Careers Week this week.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Okay, cheers.